So I came in, loved the office environment, and went to the operating room. And the first person he cut open, I passed out on the floor. So that was my wake up call to say, maybe this isn't the right path.
Have you ever been in a situation where you thought to yourself, I know my boss really wants me to use this assessment, but what does it actually tell me? Or maybe along those same lines, you're doing a bunch of different tests. Isolated joint stuff, movement screens, maybe even collecting some data with tech. But when you step back and try to take in the big picture, you're not really sure what it's telling you. If you've ever felt like that, either now or in the past, you're probably like most of us, as well as today's guest. Dr. Jennifer Reiner-Marcello has 20 years of experience in the sports performance industry, ranging from the private setting, collegiate, and professional teams. Over the last 7 years, she has focused her efforts in baseball, including rehabilitation for the San Diego Padres and reconditioning for the Minnesota Twins. While at the Twins, she created and deployed the reconditioning program, which included establishing, developing, and executing a systematic approach for coordinating motion capture data, force plate and mound information, video breakdown, strength and conditioning assessments, orthopedic evaluations, movement assessments, and hitting and pitching coaches' assessments to reduce injury, improve skill, and drive performance. Now, I realize that's a mouthful, but I promise we're going to take all that and make it incredibly practical as we try to find the intersection between assessments, movement, and sports science in baseball. Now, if you're a regular to the show, welcome back. As always, love and appreciate you. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Mike Robertson, and this is the Physical Preparation Podcast. In this show, we take deep dives into the art and science of coaching, cueing, program design, business, and personal development. Basically anything to help you become a better trainer, coach, or rehab professional. Now, like I alluded to up top, I've had all sorts of different assessments that I've used over the years. I've done the isolated table testing. I've done the bigger gross movement screens. And of course, we're making a bigger push these days to collect data and get objective numbers as to how our athletes are moving. But I kept coming up with a lot of the same questions that I asked Jenn today. First off, how do you increase buy-in with your athletes? How do you take all this information, put it through a filter, and really dial in your program design process? And last but not least, how do you step back and see the big rocks in your assessment process without getting overwhelmed with the massive amount of information you can pull in? So if you're in the baseball space, I know you're going to love this episode. And even if you're not, I think Jenn's thoughts and ideas will help guide you into tweaking and refining your own assessment process regardless of what space you're in. Jenn is so much fun to talk to, and I think she's got a great way of taking complex information or thought processes and making it super easy to understand. Now, before we jump into this week's episode, I want to give you a quick recap of the week that was, what's new in my neck of the woods, starting with kiddo sports. For Cade, the fall sports season is already kind of wrapping up, which is hard to believe. He is playing fall baseball, and he's really hit the ball well this year. Feel like he's continued to get better and better, especially as they introduce kids pitching into the equation. Still needs some work in the field, but we're working on that regularly, and I'm excited to see, with a little bit of off-season work, where he is at next spring. So he's about done. Kendall is still plugging along with soccer. Again, I can see the improvements in her effort and her performance week over week. Still some things we're working on there as well. If I can get this girl to kick the ball with her laces, I will be super thrilled, but that's kind of where they're at there. Believe it or not, this weekend is Cade's birthday. I mean, as I write this, it's hard to believe this guy is going to be 9 years old this year. So super excited for him in the sense that, he's got a baseball game. He's got a couple birthday parties. One of his friends has a party. He's got a party. Just all kinds of good stuff. He's very excited. I mean, obviously when you're anything under like 20, maybe even 21, you're pretty excited for your birthday, but especially when you're 9. So excited for him and excited to hang out with him this weekend. As far as coaching goes, really starting to tail off, which is, bittersweet, but I'm down to 4 guys. And after this week, I'm down to 2. After next week, I'm down to 1. So things are really starting to thin out there. I may have one guy that continues on for a couple more months as he's rehabbing some stuff, but weird, to think that it's just such a grind in a positive way. Like, it's a really fun grind for me. I don't mind it, but man, you just go so hard from like March or April into, now mid-October. So to go from that into where I've only got a handful of people is going to be a little bit strange, but I've got so much stuff that I want to work on, right? So, I've got like multiple Con Ed courses that I'm doing. I'm going through the Natera ISO course. I'm going through the Exerfly flywheel course. Kanga Tech is going through, or they're actually offering these free webinars on different injuries and how they're using their technology to rehab athletes. So I've got all kinds of Con Ed. I've got a bunch of projects, writing, podcast work that I want to get done in the ensuing weeks and months. So I'm excited to just have a little extra free time to use that time to dive into some of my creative outlets. So as much as I love coaching, if I can put that on the back burner just for a little bit, because there's other areas that I want to work on and get better at, so that next March, next April, when everybody starts coming back, we're going to hit the ground running, and I feel like it's going to be at a whole nother level. And that's what gets me excited about this. It's like, hey, we had a really good off season this year. I feel like all the guys, all the girls are in a really good spot, but how can we continue to grow and evolve the programs that we offer at iFast? So definitely pumped for that. And then, man, a week from today, we are going to be on a plane heading to beautiful Denver, Colorado for a week. So fall break is nearly here. And I think the big thing for us was, when you look back over the last couple years, obviously we live in Indiana, which is not the most exciting place in the world, but we spent a lot of time in Florida, whether it was spring break, fall break, winter break. So really just trying to show our kids that there's more to the great US of A than just Indiana and Florida, and just showing them the West, showing them mountains, getting out, being active, hiking, moving around a whole bunch over fall break. So definitely looking forward to that. And yeah, that's really what's new in my neck of the woods. So, like I always say, things are great here. I hope you are doing well. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to jump into this awesome episode with Jenn Reiner-Marcello. It seems like every day I talk to a young trainer or coach who is frustrated. Maybe they're frustrated with the results they're getting. Maybe they're frustrated because they don't have trusted resources to learn from. And maybe they're frustrated because they simply don't have enough clients and wonder how long they'll be able to stay in the industry. So if that sounds anything like you, I've got something that I know will help. My Complete Coach certification was created for trainers and coaches just like you, who are serious about the results they get and who know that becoming a better coach can directly translate to a bigger bottom line. This certification is going to take the last 20 years of my life's work and put it all into one massive course. In it, you'll learn how to use the R7 system to create seamless, integrated, and efficient programs for clients and athletes of all shapes and sizes. How to create the culture, environment, and relationships with everyone you train so you can get the absolute best results. And the exact progressions, regressions, and coaching cues I use in the gym, from squatting and deadlifting to pressing and pulling and everything in between. Of course, there's a ton more that I cover, but that should give you a pretty good idea of what the cert is all about. Now here's the thing, spots for the certification will only open twice per year for a limited time only. To get on the insiders list, just head over to CompleteCoachCertification.com. Again, CompleteCoachCertification.com, and then stay tuned for emails in the coming weeks. Thanks so much for your support, and I hope you'll pick up a copy of the Complete Coach Certification when it launches. Jenn, thanks so much for coming on the show here today. Really excited to have you on. Could you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Is that the lingo?
Yes.
So for sure, this is kind of cool. So appreciate the invite. So a little bit about myself. I operate in the rehab, reconditioning kind of performance space. Love to span all three. Work with really all sports, but have had probably in the last 7-8 years an affinity and concentration within the baseball world. So I work with professional teams in consulting roles now, collegiate teams as well, in addition to players that kind of have come, and I help them throughout the year during breaks and also during the postseason as well.
I love it. I love it. And talk to me. What originally got you into physical preparation? Like, how did you get started in this whole world?
I think it really started back when I was a gymnast.
Okay.
That was kind of my sport growing up. And you pay a lot of attention to form, obviously, and training is a big piece of that,
Yeah.
especially when you get to the higher competitive levels. And I think that was really what spawned this interest of, you can actually do this for a living, and led me down that path.
I love it. I love it. And then before we dive in, because I got a ton of questions I want to cover, I love getting everybody's career path. So obviously now you're in the pro baseball world, and you've been in pro baseball for a while now, but you didn't start there. So would you mind kind of giving us like your career journey, because you've got an interesting educational background too. So I'd love to hear kind of where you started education wise and kind of how you ended up where you're at today.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went to University of Florida, and originally thought, man, I'd love to be an orthopedic surgeon. So that was the original path, was medical, let's go the medical school route and pick a major that was, in line with that. Ended up shadowing. I had ankle reconstruction, and the ortho was great and said, hey, if you want to come in and shadow me and see what I do, feel free. So I came in, loved the office environment, and went to the operating room, and the first person he cut open, I passed out on the floor. So that was my wake-up call to say, maybe this isn't the right path. But I loved the movement piece. I knew there was a medical piece that I kind of wanted to fulfill as well. And so I did a bachelor's degree in exercise and sports science. And when I finished, it was very much geared towards strength and conditioning, but there was that medical piece that I wanted more of. And I came out probably with more of a mindset in line with physical therapy. But at the time, this was when chiropractors had direct access to patients. They didn't need a referral from the MD. They had a broader scope, could order MRIs, read x-rays, et cetera, et cetera. So I chose chiropractic school, but with a mindset of a PT. You can probably imagine how well that went. But I think it did give me a very different perspective, at least coming out of school. And it made me, as soon as I graduated, I was like, I just want to learn more from other people and other disciplines. And so my first gig was actually University of California, San Diego, working with all their sports. It was a school that was kind of thinking outside the box, like who hires a team chiropractor in 2006 at a college? What doesn't really happen. But thankfully, there were some people that were just outside the box thinkers. And so I was exposed very early on in my career to, what do athletic trainers learn? What do they think? What does the physical therapist think? How does the strength and conditioning coordinate with this? So it was an excellent way of learning from so many durciples for 6-7 years, which then kind of launched me into my next role, which was more in the private sector. So Todd Durkin, who owns Fitness Quest 10 out in San Diego, kind of heard of my name and was like, man, I wonder if she could pair up with our current physical therapy team to help provide the rehab here. So ended up working out, teamed up with the physical therapist there. We ended up opening 5 locations around San Diego and really kind of honed in on the private sector. We ended up getting a lot of the Padres coming in. So we built this kind of, relationship with them. And then they ended up bringing us into the Padres organization to actually provide their PT.
Oh, wow.
So this was kind of like where the love of baseball came around. So yeah, I started diving into more of the baseball specific side of things. Took a little break to have my first little one.
Yeah.
And once she kind of got to an age where I felt like I could kind of go back and give some time back to the work side of things, we moved to Florida, and I ended up taking a role with the Minnesota Twins, originally as their strength and conditioning for the rehab people.
Okay.
So brought me back to the strength and conditioning side, which was kind of fun. I was like, all right, here we go. Like busting out the books back from school and diving in. But I think what was so interesting about that role is it morphed into what I considered reconditioning. And I pitched this to the higher ups to say, like, here's this role called reconditioning, kind of bridges the gap between rehab and S&C, which is kind of what I'm already doing.
Right.
But then there's this other piece where we had skill coaches, and the pitching coaches would come in and say, hey, we've been trying to cue this guy into doing this or using this drill, and it's just not working. Is there something that you see from your lens? So usually the sports medicine side was too busy to do another evaluation. S&C had their own stuff going on. So it landed on my lap to kind of take deeper dives into these healthy players to understand why they couldn't execute whatever sort of move. So we deemed it reconditioning, even though it was applied to the healthy and the injured. And it worked out so well that the second year or the third year, they ended up allowing me to hire someone to fill that role.
Oh, wow.
To help me out. Yeah. So we ended up having 2 people in the reconditioning space. And that's what I, ended up doing with the twins, and then decided to leave this next year, or this year actually, and do more of a consulting role, but the same thing with other teams.
Yeah.
So
I love it. I love it. Okay. So like I said, tons of questions that I want to ask you and just lots of things that I want to chat about, but let's start with some basic stuff that probably has a pretty big answer on your end. So for starters, what I would love to hear about is your assessment process. Because like you said, you've been influenced by a lot of different areas. So like just nuts and bolts, what does the assessment process look like when somebody comes to you?
Yeah, I said that there's 3 main buckets. One is, let's do our global tests, the standing rotations and the squats and what everybody looks at. I tend to do videos and pictures of all of it because I think there's a lot you can miss just looking at it once.
Agreed.
There's things that, details, the devil is in the details, I think, often with regard to how they're doing a certain motion. What is their strategy to get around something maybe they don't have? So one is kind of the big bucket of global tests that are standing. Then obviously the table tests. And I will say that, gosh, it used to take me an hour to do table tests. I had so many, not realizing that they were all kind of duplicates upon one another. So I've really kind of trimmed the fat down on that. And I'd say maybe, 20 to 30 minutes on some table things. And then the last piece, which I think has really made a huge difference in the way I evaluate and treat, is if it's a player that's either had an injury or maybe performance has declined, I'll ask for a video send me a video when you're pitching at your best. And then send me your most recent video. And I want to see what's changed, right? Or send me your most recent video before you had this injury. I want to compare that to when you were moving well, or when you thought you were moving well and performing well. And being able to identify the differences and then matching that up with the video that you take for your standing tests, squats, etc., and the table test can often give you a really good picture as to what was lost or what's happening that has created the problem. So those are kind of my 3 main buckets.
I really like that. I don't know if it's one of those like, duh, kind of moments, but like, I really like that idea of, no, like, show me what you did or how you looked when you were playing your highest level. And then to be able to compare that. So you've got like this baseline. Really, it's not a baseline. It's like a peak efficiency versus where they're at now. You could probably draw a lot of good conclusions from that, I would assume.
100%. I mean, things that they're not even aware of, like, look how much flexion you're missing in as you follow through on this pitch versus where you were. And they don't even appreciate those things. Right. Or look at the change in your load. Look how much more, access to internal rotation you have on this back leg because of this. And now do you see how you're doing that?
Yes.
Right. And so they start to connect the dots too, because now you're speaking their language. Yeah. Oftentimes a toe touch and a squat kind of, whatever. But when you speak their language of their sport and what they were doing and what they are doing, and then you can connect the dots to your standing global tests, like then you've got their attention.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I'm sure, is that a lot of times when these things are starting to deteriorate on their end, it's a very gradual process. So they may not have this sense of, oh, it just feels off. But then, like you said, if you can compare video and then you can show different table tests and say, this is where you were, this is where you're at now. Again, it's like, oh, wow, now I get it.
Yeah. 100%.
I love it.
So I started doing that probably 3 years ago. Obviously, when you work in baseball, there's no shortage of video.
Right, sure.
So it's easy to obtain that stuff and to even get it from all different angles, which is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so one thing I'm curious about is that I think movement-based assessments are very commonplace now. People are used to squatting, hinging, lunging, whatever kind of global assessments. But there is still some people that don't necessarily buy into table tests or the isolated stuff. So I'm curious, do you ever get any blowback from that, or is it kind of more universally accepted in baseball versus maybe in other sports?
Yeah, no, great question. I think when you're dealing on the medical side, everyone comes in with this foundational way of measuring range of motion, right? Hip
Yep.
flexion, hip IRs, those are all pretty standard. But I will say, the way that, and I have to give a huge shout out to Bill Hartman, obviously your partner.
Yep.
The way that he looks at movement and goes through table tests is very different. And
Yep.
most certainly it raises some eyebrows when you tell someone your shoulder flexion is actually 40 degrees,
Yeah.
right? And they're getting 160 on the table. It's like, that's not just an error in measurement. Like, what are you looking at that's differently?
Right.
That's different. So I think that raises a lot of eyebrows. But what I will say is looking at those table tests in a different light, meaning you're not just measuring a ball and socket. You're not just measuring the femur on the acetabulum. You are looking at the entire system, right? How
Yep.
the ilium is moving relative to the femur, how the sacrum is moving relative to the ilium, how the spine is moving, right?
Yep.
And when you can appreciate those things and you have a mental image of what is and isn't working, I think your manual techniques become much more specific. Your exercises are much more targeted. And as a result, your results are that much, you get to the answer faster. You're getting the results that people aren't getting.
Yep.
And then people start to ask you, so what was that test that you were doing? And so rather than trying to explain your way through something, they're coming to you with questions and they're actually curious of what were you actually looking at there?
Right. Right. Okay, so this leads to kind of a good follow-up, I think. What are some of the issues that you see now, like in retrospect, when it comes to table tests, right? Is it just that people are looking at each like little segment in isolation versus globally, or, what are we doing wrong there? How can we get better with our table tests?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, I was under the impression that 60-40. Right? That's the gold standard. Everyone's got 60 ER and everyone's got 40 IR, and that's what everyone should be, trying to achieve.
Right.
And wow, like talk about flipping me on my head to say like, hey, there are these different archetypes, which then set the body up for being biased toward different ranges. So that in and of itself was huge to know that, hey, if I have a wide, I'm probably not going to get 60 degrees of ER,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a big piece. I think understanding that table tests are dirty at the end of the day. People slide, people roll, the cushion of the table,
Yep.
right, can all give you different feedback. And that's something that's not at least brought to your attention during school as well.
Yep.
Right. And then just understanding, like, we've all seen an anterior pelvic orientation before, but to understand what that means on a table, right? When you lay that person down and they're technically kind of still being pulled in that position, now you're not just measuring a hip IR/ER, right? You are measuring the orientation of that pelvis that's come forward. So what does that actually look like? Well, it's going to magnify your IR and it's going to decrease your ERs. And so those sorts of just tidbits of information have been gold.
Yeah. I remember when Bill first started doing a lot of this stuff. I'm thinking it was at least 6 or 7 years ago where he really started to dive into this. And we had this basketball player come in with like the most notorious anterior orientation of all time, right? And he puts him on the table and I'm like, man, look at this guy. He's got amazing hip IR. And he just looks at me, he's like, yeah, that's fake. You know how he is. Yeah. He's just like, yeah, that's fake.
Fake.
But yeah, it just totally shifts your viewpoint of kind of the way you see movement and what is good movement or bad movement and strategies that people use to cheat or find ways to get the job done, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the other piece too, is when you can link all of these things together, like, okay, I see on his left rotation that he's dumping the pelvis forward to try and get a little bit more, internal rotation of the femur.
Yep.
And it's creating that arch in the lower back. Okay, I'm also seeing that on the table. Oh, and guess what? By the way, his lead leg block, look what he's doing there. And so when you can piece all of those parts together of what their strategy is, and you see it play out in all of these different scenarios, it allows you to narrow your intervention so that you're much more targeted and can maybe get it on the first try as far as what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And I think that's something we're all shooting for, right? We've all had our days of the shotgun approach. And I think the longer you do this, the more you want to be a sniper, right? And you want to be hyper specific.
Yes.
So I love it. Okay. So kind of as a follow-up to that, I know that beyond the standard table tests and movement tests, like you alluded to, you also dive into the sport-specific movement and the sports science side. So I would love to hear, what you're looking at from those respective areas as well.
Yeah. So I think what was challenging about this year was, if I'm not affiliated with a team, I don't have direct access to a lot of the tech that they're pulling data from,
Yeah.
right? So there's certain things that I would key in on. If I'm watching a major league player pitch live on TV, I can watch toe drags, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can see what's happening as far as that back leg curve as it's going through the dirt to tell you where someone's center of mass is and maybe what motions they do and do not have available. So using like little things like that. As far as looking at, we talked about kind of breaking down the swing and breaking down the video. I think one of the biggest eye-opener aspects to me was understanding that at the end of the day, it's all gait, or as Bill would say, propulsion, right?
Yep.
You're moving across the ground. So if you can understand what early gait, middle, and late is, and you understand the relationship of each bone and where it is in space, then you understand everything in terms of hitting, pitching, running, change of mechanics, swimming for that matter, right? If you understand the shapes, if you understand the shapes that they have to make and get into, and then you break it down into those 3 phases, it really gives you a good idea of how they need to move and what they don't have available.
Yes.
And I think from a sports science side of things as well, the motion capture data that they're able to get through live, as they're pitching. So different systems, Hawkeye, Simi, these are all ways of, tons of cameras that surround the stadium that break down movement into biomechanical data to tell you where they are in space. That's also very helpful. And that was what, we had used with the Twins to also piece together from a sports science side. Okay, here's what I'm seeing on my general movements. I'm seeing this on the table. Their compensatory strategy is to do this. Is that what they're doing from motion capture standpoint? Yes, it is. Okay, so I know if I give them access to this motion, it should take away that compensatory strategy, and then we see it change on this biomechanical motion capture data. So linking those things together is a lot of fun when you have access to that information. Otherwise, you have to get kind of crafty.
For sure. And I think this would be helpful for those of us that are unfamiliar, like me, like I'm not in pro baseball. I would love it if you could describe some of the tech that, when you're with the Twins or when you're with a major league club that you have access to that's maybe more baseball specific, or maybe just to be more clear, what are the tools you're using and what information are they giving you?
100%. Yeah. So I think a couple of things that are really interesting. Rapsodo is something that'll give you the movement of the ball, the spin rate, right, that's occurring on the ball. And so if I'm working with a player, at least currently, they have access to that information. And I can say, let's say they're a player that has a fantastic curveball.
Yep.
And the spin rate on a curveball matters. It can certainly play into the movement, right, of the ball. Yeah. And if they tell me from a performance side of things, you know what, I've really kind of lost movement on that curveball, I don't know what it is, that tells me, okay, let's look at spin rate. Has your spin rate gone down on that curveball? And if you think about what contributes to spin rate, if I have a thorax that's able to turn, if I have a scapula that's able to rotate, if I have a humerus that can turn, I have a proximal and distal radial ulnar joint that can turn, and a hand that can turn, I have all of these additive rotational turns that are adding to, right, the spin rate of the ball. Yeah. And so if those relative motions are lost, and now that arm is behaving more like one unit versus several segments, that can decrease the spin rate on the ball. So that can give me a clue of, hey, I need to look at all of these different segments to see what's moving and what's not. And if I can restore some of those relative motions, does that now feed back into this curveball and him actually increase the spin rate and therefore increasing the movement on the ball? Yeah. So that might be one thing to look at. Another one that I think is really interesting are the force plate mounds. And so force plate mounds have three different directions. So you have a x-axis, which is typically vertical. Yeah. Then you have a y-axis, which is basically the pitcher toward home. Yeah. And then you have a z-axis, which is like first to third.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so as they're delivering the baseball, you would think like, okay, the fastest way from point A to point B is a straight line, right? Sure. And so if I'm seeing something where we're getting a lot of the Z, the first to third sort of movement, that's telling me that he's, again, creating some sort of orientation to deliver the baseball toward home. And
Yeah.
it allows me to look at, okay, am I missing some relative motion on that back hip that he cannot create an effective load? Therefore, he's kind of getting outside his base of support, and it's sending him, towards third and
Right.
keeping, right, like not being able to open the pelvis.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's a great kind of KPI to say, okay, if I can get this motion to happen on this back leg, and we're able to then put it into a drill, and it to the eye it looks good, but then we put him on the force plate mound, and now we're seeing that there's less of that first to third axis movement.
Yep.
Then we know that we're on the right track.
That's
So I think
awesome.
force plate mounds are super interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so how real time are you doing this? Now I'm really interested because, like, I mean, are you literally like trying an intervention and then taking them out there and testing this stuff, or, is it that like, or a
Yeah.
couple weeks? Like, how often are you doing this?
Yeah. So I think, easy things to look at obviously are video. And that's going to be, you can see a difference, I think, right away. And I never
Yeah.
thought that, okay, if I do an intervention, I'm going to see it that quickly, but it happens, especially in the professional side. I think obviously if you're dealing with more youth sports, there's some skill side that still has to be developed
For
there,
sure.
to kind of see some of these changes. But in a perfect world, yes, I'd love to do a quick intervention and then put them right back on the force plate. But at least when you have data scientists that are there capturing the data, and then maybe by the time they are available to run that again, it's a week or two.
Sure.
But at least, I think giving myself a week or 2 weeks to try and get that change to happen was kind of like the sweet spot to see an appreciable difference.
Yep.
So it would be like, okay, let's get him back on the force plate mount, or let's get him on, our motion capture data in 2 weeks to see if we've made that change.
Yeah. Well, and the cool thing too is like you might see that change that quickly, but sometimes it takes a while for it to stabilize. You need a couple more interventions, or you need to introduce some different kind of layers to that stimuli to make it stick a little bit better. Which is,
100%.
like this is the thing that people, oh yeah, that one time that you made a change. Yeah, you can pick at that, but
right.
You can make a change that quick, but you're right. Sometimes it does take a little bit longer for it to stick from a movement perspective, from a movement skill retraining perspective. But yeah, yes. I mean, you've seen it in some of the posts that you put up on social media lately too. Like you can see changes pretty fast if you're doing the right things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think to your point, like sometimes it's a very complex situation. It's like, okay, I got to get a foot and ankle to give me some more dorsiflexion. I got to get some motion to get some calcaneal version. Oh, and by the way, I also have to get some tibia to play into internal rotation as well. And I need a hip, right? So there's many segments to piece together.
Yes.
And then being able to ramp up the exercise from something that's very basic, right, to something that's more advanced, to now we're actually putting more rate of force development. That can certainly take a period of time to do.
Yes.
But then there's some instances where I had a pitcher who, like his main, like his best pitch was a changeup. And if you looked at his hand, sure enough, it was biased toward a ton of pronation, which makes them great at changeups.
Yep.
But at the same time, it was pulling away from his okay slider, and his slider became really crappy.
Okay.
And sure enough, if you looked at his hand from kind of when we compared it earlier in the season, his hand was so pronated and stuck into more of this kind of IR'd position.
Yep.
And so sure enough, it was stealing from his capability to get the hand more supinated for the slider. And so we did a quick, just, manual mobilization through the distal radial ulnar joint. He had a bullpen that day and tested it out. And sure enough, it was back to what it was, at its best. So awesome. Those, depending on the complexity of what you're dealing with, sometimes it's going to take a little bit to ramp that up. And sometimes it's, hey, they just needed to be able to access this with a hand and you got it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, so talk to me here. You have just described table tests, movement tests, sport-specific movement analysis, and sports science. So how do you take all that information, not get overwhelmed, and use it to help better your training decisions? Yeah.
So, and thankfully, this is kind of how it's turned out. I'll let you know if it ever goes in opposite directions. But I think what's so powerful about understanding the global tests are in front of you and linking that to your table tests, that lays this foundation. So you understand what they have available to them, to what positions they can essentially get into. Then when you're looking at all the different data, the force plate data, the motion capture data, whatever you want to layer on top of that, 99% of the time, what they're showing you as far as their limitation is coming up in all the rest of their data. And it's so cool to see this crossover. It's all like all the arrows are pointing in the same direction. Every once in a while you get something that's like, I don't know why, but we're going to figure that out. And then it makes you dive in and understand that a little bit more.
Sure.
But thankfully, I've, at least from what I've dealt with over the last 3 years and having tech available, most of this all lines up based on those fundamental tests. Again, if you understand your gait, early, middle, and late, what are my shapes? What shape can't they make? Okay, they can't do this. What are some compensations? I'm probably going to see X, Y, and Z. What do we see in all this data? Oh, look, we see an X, Y, and Z. Perfect. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it comes
like a confirmation.
Yeah, it comes down to having like a really comprehensive, well thought out model. And I mean, I sound like Bill now talking about the model, but it's true, right? Like there has to be like this comprehensive overview of how movement should look, that, like you said, the shapes and the positions you need to be able to get into or out of. And if you can't check those boxes, it's probably either, maybe not now, but at some point it's going to, at minimum, detract from performance and potentially get you injured, right? Depending on the intensity, just the volume of training, whatever the case may be. But the comprehensiveness of your model really sets the stage, and it's the foundation and the backbone for all of the scientific, sport-specific, technological stuff you have access to.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, I think once I really got a handle of Bill's model, and as you said, like those principles, the principles hold true, whether you're looking at it through motion capture, force plate information, all of these things.
Yeah, I love it. So you have this really wide-ranging background. We got all the areas that you've talked about professionally, doctor of chiropractic. I know you've got some acupuncture in there. So with all those tools in the toolbox, talk to me about your thought process about when you want to apply a certain intervention. Like, I'm really fascinated by that. Because again, us lowly personal trainers, right? We can, do some breathing and resets, but you have a lot of tools in the toolbox, right? Yeah. So like, talk me through your thought process of when you're going to go to a manual strategy or an adjustment versus acupuncture. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I think what's nice about having so many different tools is I could look at a problem and say, okay, I have 5 different options in terms of what's in my tool belt here.
Yep.
And I think one of the first things I ask a player or patient that I'm working with is, hey, what have you tried in the past that you've really liked? Or what have you tried that you just really did not go well? You kind of have a negative, thought process towards whatever it might be. And that often dictates it, right? It's like, I may be the best acupuncture dry needle person in the world, but if this person had several bad experiences, right, that plays into their psyche. And they're very much a part of the rehab process with me. And if they're not on board for what I'm doing, then it's probably not going to go very well.
Yeah.
So I need to take into account what has worked well in the past. What do they kind of look on favorably? Okay, of those things, maybe there's 3 things at that point. Now, what do I choose? And sometimes I look at it and say, you know what, like I could do this adjustment. I don't perform it very well. Maybe I go to a mulligan mobilization that's I'm much better at in this area, right?
Right.
Or maybe there's a certain cupping technique that I've had like excellent results with just based on the experience of this particular presentation. So I would say it's, what is the patient comfortable with? What are they open to trying and being on board with? And then where in my skill set is this a great move for me to try or do? And or where have I had the most success in treating this specific, in context, what I'm looking at here on the table?
Yeah. It's interesting. You led with what do they like or what do they maybe not like? I'm reminded, I was at the Seattle Sounders Sports Science Seminar. This was probably 2014 or somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And I remember one of the lecturers was talking about the role of perception of like recovery modalities or treatments, right? And he said like they have data where you can look at, hey, the exact same massage therapist, one person loves massage, feels like it's beneficial, all this, so they get a massage and their recovery goes through the roof. Another one, for whatever reason, doesn't like massage, doesn't like their body, something along those lines, right? Sure. And they have the exact opposite, like their recovery tanks. So I think it's really valuable that you talk about perception and how people feel about the different modalities or treatments that you might perhaps use with them.
Right, 100%. I think there's a big psychological piece into everything, right? I think that's why Bill has the purple room, right? Color,
Yes. Yes.
color, sound, right? All of these things that we kind of write off in our beginning stages of learning and practicing, and then we kind of come around and say, huh, there is some truth, and we're seeing more science and data to back that up, and so you have to take those things into consideration.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, big question time. If you could alter the space-time continuum and give young Jenn Reiner-Marcello one piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah. It would absolutely be, do not undervalue what you do. I don't know if this is I think females, it probably runs a little bit more rampant in females, but it can obviously be both. But I just remember coming out of school and being like, gosh, I don't know anything. Like, I can't charge this for my service, or right. I should just accept this as a salary because, gosh, I really don't know much, right? But then you fast forward 5 years later and I'm saying the same thing. And you fast forward 10 years later and I'm saying the same thing, know? And so, but there comes a point where it's like, you've put a lot of time and effort and studying into your craft. And value what you do. And most certainly when you walk into an organization, they have their best interest in mind, right? They're not going to want to overinflate the number, right? But at the same time, you have to be able to come to the table and say like, no, this is what I'm worth. And, this is the value that I bring to your team. So I would absolutely tell myself, day one, do not undervalue what you bring.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, and you make a great point too. Like, we could beat ourselves up for probably our entire career of, man, I don't know enough, or I need to learn more about this. Like, I'm 22 years in now, and it's still like every day I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Why? That's so simple. Why didn't I think of that? But yeah, you're never going to know it all. But yeah, you have to value what you bring to an organization or to a facility, whatever the case may be. You got to value it because nobody's going to value you more than you do, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Last but not least, we've got our lightning round. So 4 fairly short questions. Your answer can be as long or short as you like. Number 1, I'm always intrigued by people such as yourself trying to find work-life balance. You've been in pro sports. You've got little people at home. So how do you go about balancing your time around these high-level athletes with being a wife and a mom?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, that was, one of the reasons why I actually took a step back out of professional sports. It is so hard.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know how people do it. And so I will say that kind of reorganizing things and saying, hey, you know what, I can still be involved in professional sports through a consulting role was a great move for me because I got to say, hey, this is when I'm available. We get these hours, you get these days, And so I can organize myself better around being able to have time at home and being with the kiddos and Brandon. And then the other piece too, I think this is just stemming from growing up, is we always had dinner at night as a family together. Like even though, I had gymnastics or whatever sort of event going on, it was like we would shift dinner earlier or later just so that we could all sit down as a family. And I think that stuck with me till this day. So breakfast and dinner is always together as a family. Like we have to sometimes shift things around just to make it happen. But making that a priority is the big piece as well. And then in addition to date nights with my husband, like making sure once a week, there's at least a time that we get to sit down for several hours, enjoy our time together. But if you don't plan it, it doesn't happen. So, just like you have a calendar that you're planning patients or clients and they're coming in, you have to do that for the family as well.
Yeah, I love it. That's great advice. Okay, number 2. Approximately how many times have you heard, good morning, happy Thursday? I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect.
Oh God,
how many times have you heard that?
So here, when I was diving into Bill's model, which was about 2 years ago, I had an hour and a half commute down and an hour and a half commute back.
Oh my gosh.
The Twins in Fort Myers.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had 3 hours of time, which is kind of nice as a mom. Like you're like, 3 hours to myself, I didn't actually mind the commute because of that one aspect of it. And so honestly, for 3 hours a day, I would be listening to Bill's work. And it was because, gosh, it would take me 8 times to understand one segment. And now I think I've gotten better because I'm down to like 3, But still, I would listen to something over and over and over again. And I'd sit there in silence and think about how can I know this representation. How do I apply this? I would dictate notes into my phone of okay, this is maybe somewhere I can go with this player based on kind of what I've learned now. But for a year, it was 6 days a week, 3 hours a day
Yeah.
of learning Bill stuff.
I love it.
And then,
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that tip too of dictating notes into like the note app or something in your phone.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing that
Right.
all the time now, like just podcasts and things. It's so much easier. I'm walking the dogs. Okay, I'm going to pause this,
Right.
go do that. Because yeah, otherwise it's like in your brain and by the time you get home, it's gone. It's gone.
Yep.
I love it. Okay.
You got it.
Number 3. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned working in pro baseball?
Yeah. So this one, and this one is still a struggle. It's learning that the adaptation that player shows you, and it could be specific to the position that they play, the adaptations that they've developed can be favorable, right, to the position or whatever they're doing. And so from a traditional standpoint, like coming out of school, I would have been like, oh my goodness, like he's got this anterior orientation of his shoulder, and his external rotation is this and that. But if his best pitch is his changeup, there's an orientation piece that happens to that, meaning the relative motion between all of those segments, the more it kind of operates as one, the easier it is to kind of kill the spin rate or kill the velo on the ball, right?
Yeah.
So understanding what that adaptation provides to that player, but then knowing when that adaptation has gone too far, right? It's actually created an injury. So now we have to understand, okay, this adaptation is what makes him great. I need to pull it back enough so that we make him healthy, but I can't take away his ability to perform this one specific pitch.
Yeah.
And so just understanding and appreciating that certain adaptations are favorable was a huge kind of light bulb in dealing with professional sports.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, last but not least, number 4. What's next for Jenn Reiner-Marcello? What are you working on? What are you excited about? Anything?
Yeah, I'm really excited about. So I came out of school in 2002, and force plates were really only something that were in biomechanics labs, and now they're like ubiquitous in weight rooms. So Matt Jordan has a really great course on just some of the basics of force plate information. So I'm diving into that right now, and now that I have a kind of a lull between some off-season stuff starting with baseball, I just want to understand a little bit more on the force plate side of things. So that'll be one. We're taking a nice vacation to Hawaii. I actually grew up on Oahu. And
nice.
So we're flying the whole family to Oahu in November for just a nice kind of 11 day getaway. So that's kind of immediate future of what's going on.
Good for you. Good for you. And yeah, I had Matt on, it's probably been a year and a half ago now. Loved it.
All right.
And I'm with you. I'm going to take that course because we just ordered a pair of force plates for the gym. So we're getting into that as well.
I'm looking forward to your Hawkins dynamic.
Yes,
I thought you were having Hawkins dynamic. That'd be great.
Yeah, very excited.
Looking forward to that.
Very excited. So Jenn, thank you so much for coming on. It was really great catching up with you today. Where can my listeners find out more about you and the great work you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So Twitter handle and Instagram are the same. It's Dr. J Reiner, Reiner. And Facebook as well. So I tend to just put thought-provoking pictures up there. Let's just put it that way. Of just saying like, here are the changes that you can actually make. These are some of the kind of thoughts behind it. So that's probably the best place to kind of see what I'm doing and keep in touch. Yeah.
Well, I will say this too. I really enjoy the fact that you're putting stuff out there more. I don't know if this is new or maybe maybe the algorithm is just feeding it to me. But I love the stuff that you're putting out there because I feel like there is a lot of just pure regurgitation just out there in social media. So I love the fact that you're taking concepts and then putting your own spin on it or showing how it applies to your sport. Definitely love what you're doing. So please keep it up.
Well, it's funny because as I said earlier, I take so many photos of, just posture and movements right out of the get-go. And to keep me honest, right? Am I making this change? And so I was looking through through all my pictures, and I'm like, man, there's some really good pictures in here. I should start using this more.
Yeah.
So that's what you're seeing is I'm just kind of putting more things out there to say like, this was pretty cool. Check it out.
I love it. I love it. Well, keep up the good work. And again, Jenn, thank you so much for coming on. This was really great.
100%. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
All right, my friend, that does it for this week's episode with Jenn Reiner-Marcello. Really hope you enjoyed it. I had a ton of fun talking to her. Obviously, she is very knowledgeable in the ways of IFAST. She's studied under Bill Hartman. You know, she's just such a great mind in the sense that she's trying to take all of these different things, right? That I think for a long period of time, table tests, movement-based tests, force plate data, you know, motion capture analysis and hitting and pitching breakdowns, all this stuff has been very siloed. And to have people like her that are trying to go in, take all that information, all that data, pull it together, and then start to have these really good conversations about, okay, here's how this impacts this, which is impacting this. So you can really tie it all together and help the athlete understand how maybe some of those table tests or those movement screens are impacting their ability to play their sport. So really enjoyed it. I had a ton of fun talking with Jenn, and I hope you enjoyed it and got some things out of it as well. Now, before I let you go, I got a small favor to ask. If you are not already subscribed to the show, please do that right now today. It'll take 2 seconds out of your day, and you'll know each and every week when a new episode drops. So if you want to subscribe, go to iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Play, the Amazon store, wherever you consume podcasts. Go there right now, hit the subscribe button so you know each and every week when a new episode drops. So my friend, as always, thank you so much for your support. Love and appreciate you, and we'll be back next week with our next episode. Take care.